GM, and welcome to Moloch Traps, our new podcast here at From A to Z. I'm Z-Fi, this is Zombie Shepherd, and we are excited to be bringing you this new show in collaboration with BanklessDAO and its audiovisual team. Now, to be clear, any opinions expressed by either of us in these shows or in this series are our own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of BanklessDAO at large. Now, this week, we will continue to study and discuss excerpts from the Meditations on Moloch essay written by Scott Alexander. The essay provides examples of multipolar traps, and it delves into various instances from history, biology, and economics to illustrate how competition often results in collective harm. In today's episode, we'll discuss the concept of Malthusian Traps. Let's start with Alexander's words on this example. Suppose you are one of the first rats introduced onto a pristine island. It's full of yummy plants, and you live an idyllic life lounging about, eating, and composing great works of art. You're one of those rats from the Rats of NIMH. You live a long life, mate, and have a dozen children. All of them have a dozen children, and so on. In a couple generations, the island has 10,000 rats, and it has reached its carrying capacity. Now there's not enough food and not enough space to go around, and a certain percent of each new generation dies in order to keep the population steady at 10,000. A certain sect of rats abandons art in order to devote more of their time to scrounging for survival. Each generation, a bit less of this sect dies than members of the mainstream, until after a while no rat composes any art at all, and any sect of rats who try to bring it back will go extinct within a few generations. In fact, it's not just art. Any sect at all that is leaner, meaner, and more survivalist than the mainstream will eventually take over. If one sect of rats altruistically decides to limit its offspring to 2 per couple in order to decrease overpopulation, that sect will die out, swarmed out of existence by its more numerous enemies. If one sect of rats starts practicing cannibalism and finds that it gives them an advantage over their fellows, it will eventually take over and reach fixation. If some rat scientists predict that depletion of the island's nut stores is accelerating at a dangerous rate, and they will soon be exhausted completely, a few sects of rats might try to limit their nut consumption to a sustainable level. Those rats will be outcompeted by their more selfish cousins. Eventually, the nuts will be exhausted, most of the rats will die off, and the cycle will begin again. Any sect of rats advocating some action to stop the cycle will be outcompeted by their cousins, for whom advocating anything is a waste of time that could be used to compete and consume. For a bunch of reasons, evolution is not quite as Malthusian as the ideal case, but it provides the prototype example we can apply to other things to see the underlying mechanism. From a God's eye view, it is easy to say that the rats should maintain a comfortably low population. From within the system, each individual rat will follow its genetic imperative, and the island will end up in an endless boom-bust cycle. So that's the Malthusian Traps story as depicted through this rat population.
I would say first, Robert Malthus developed this theory directly before and as the Industrial Revolution was taking place. So his theory, while in Alexander's example, he talked about rats, according to Robert Malthus, this was about human population and food production. So, which, obviously that's what the metaphor was too, but they used rats, and Malthus was all about this is happening to people. And largely it's because he was coming up with these ideas pre-Industrial Revolution, where we saw food production increase dramatically. And over the last 100 years, we've only seen it pick up more and more and more. So I think that when he came up with this theory, and the model itself seems to be true, whether you relate it to what he related it to or not, it seems to be a rather good model to model different things. But as far as this one thing, it seems that it's largely been proven untrue so far, unless we're just on a bigger boom cycle than, like, I guess there's people who believe in like the fourth turning, and maybe we're at the point of like, this is the bust cycle coming now. But I would say, as far as food production goes, that's not true. We're not really in a bust cycle in food production. We might be in a bust cycle as far as capital access and having access to capital to get food. That's another thing. But, as we discussed in one of our previous episodes, like one single grocery store throws away, hundreds of dollars, a grocery cart at least full of food every night.
So we likely have, at least from that small example, we likely have enough food, enough resources for the population.
Right. And we know, like with housing, for instance, there's so many buildings empty, like just not vacant, with nothing in it, totally vacant. Either, a lot of them are totally good buildings that have been allowed to run down over time but meanwhile, like, there's homeless people in the street. There's more empty houses than there are people in the street.
Right. There is enough. It's just not being allocated properly.
Exactly. And it's because of other ideologies that prevent us from having the full level of compassion that we do. It's not good for the market to give things away for free, because then why would anybody do anything is really what it comes down to. And I think a lot of that ideology is born out of this Malthusian trap being played out. Like, everyone believes there's not enough, even while throwing enough away. And it's a cognitive dissonance to say that, like, people deserve to be homeless because they weren't able to play the game well, while in the other hand, just literally throwing away food in homes.
Can I put up let me put up the chart here. We'll put up the graph, the Malthusian chart. So this is straight from Wikipedia. And essentially what it's showing is that the production of food, in this case, is a linear slope, and the population increase is an exponential slope. This intersection point is the point of Malthusian catastrophe, and everything above that production of food line and the population curve at the peak, that is the Malthusian trap.
Right. That population exceeds production.
That's when it would start to shrink again.
I think the reason that this idea has proliferated for so long, and even though it's largely been proven false so far, and, since it's been thought up, is that, so if you're looking at this chart, that point at the Malthusian catastrophe, it's actually very profitable to keep the world at that point just before catastrophe, because we call that supply and demand. It's very profitable to keep everybody in the belief that we are approaching a Malthusian catastrophe, and even though all of the evidence proves otherwise. And by forcing the world into this constant by forcing individuals, everyone in the world, to believe, no matter what your political ideology is, and almost probably any country you live on the planet, we can see that it's not true, but there's still a part of us that has to believe it's true, that there's not enough. And in a lot of ways, it's because we see it on the local level as far as like jobs and resources. And we see it like, we see it in small ways, and then we think that must be the way the whole entire world is. And like, we're always racing towards this cliff, even though we can look around and see that there's enough and we're throwing it away. This is what's really weird about that cognitive dissonance, is that even if we are headed towards a Malthusian catastrophe, none of our greed and waste and hoarding of resources does anything to help us avoid the Malthusian catastrophe. We all go through it, whether or not Like, and actually, at least at the local level, at least at the poorer level, anywhere from basically out of the top 10% of rich people is going to feel it really bad. And it's because that's when that's the people who won't have enough, and it's manufactured is, I guess, where I feel like this entire idea has to be perpetuated, because it keeps people in check with their governments. It keeps people in check with their jobs. Knowing that food gets thrown away and resources are being wasted all the time in the name of GDP growth and capital growth, while telling us that there's not enough for the people on the planet, is a backwards thinking that only serves the people at the top who are wealthier than entire nations. So I guess that's something.
That's an interesting point for sure. When you've got individuals hoarding more than entire nations.
Right. And
it's a whole different
I guess what I was getting at there is that it doesn't okay, so the idea of the Malthusian trap or the Malthusian catastrophe leads us to think, oh my God, something dangerous is happening, something bad is coming, but none of the actions we take about that thing are in any way going to help us. And the only people who will get through those things are the people who already have the most actual resources. And that means capital, land, processing, and compute is what's, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, 2023, compute power is going to be a bottleneck.
Right. So I think that we're not actually heading towards a cliff, and that the cliff is largely manufactured, and we know it is, because we can see the amount of waste that goes into the trash, and we can see the amount of capital that has accrued around individuals. And that, regardless of how you feel about, capitalism or billionaires or money in general, there's no way to justify unused capital pooling around a single individual while you have other people dying in the world.
While there are tragedies happening simultaneously.
And that's why I say manufactured. Like, you're making it up because we can see it's over there.
Yeah.
We know where it is.
I don't like that. I don't like the way it feels. I don't disagree with it, but I don't like the way it feels.
No. And so, yeah, I guess if there is a the model is good. The model makes sense. It will happen in local situations. It will happen. Let's put it in a situation it would happen in. You go to a party and you order enough pizza for 100 people, and 150 people show up. That is a small...
It would be more like you order enough food for 150 people. There are only 100 at the party, and now 50 more people show up. Or 100 more people show up because they heard there was extra pizza. Right. And now there's not enough pizza for everyone because the population increased so rapidly over the food production.
Right. And yeah, and I guess the boom bust would be, well, we order more pizza, but the pizza takes time to get there, and now there's a gap where there's not enough pizza.
Bunch of hungry people unpizzaed. Yeah.
There's your bust. So, I mean, it's not to say that the model is flawed. The model makes a lot of sense. But in our...
You're given an objectively limited amount of resources in whatever case. The planet itself has a limited amount of resources.
My yard, where I grow my food, is a limited amount of space. There's only so much food I can grow in my yard. You know, that is literally the Malthusian situation he brought up, was you need land to grow food. Land to food ratio can only get so big.
And the important piece here is that when Malthus made this model, it was by observing like 2,000 years of previous history, where
so he's not
agriculture had already started, but the only way to increase food production was to put more land under production.
And typically...
Go ahead.
Yeah, real quick. Typically, the way that you would do that when you ran out of land, because that's your market cap, how much land you have for agriculture is your market cap. And the more people you have and the more housing they need, the less land you have for food. So that's where we get a little thing called war, where we go take our neighbor's land and resources because GDP growth has to happen. And that's called war. Right. And that's also the Malthusian catastrophe can be famine, but it can also be war. And it's most likely going to be war if you can.
Because war is more profitable than famine.
Well, I mean, people don't like to say it about like poor criminals, but the bottom line is if you're hungry, you're going to steal. And countries do it too. So
I think what the game changer was instead of needing to now go to war to get more arable land, the Industrial Revolution changed everything. Suddenly now you can use one tractor to take care of 10 times as much land. You might already have the land, but you don't have the labor. Now you have a tractor, and one person can take all of this under production. Chemicals were invented. Now all of a sudden we've got fertilizers. So using the same amount of arable land space, you can increase your food yield because you're applying chemicals, fertilizers, or even natural fertilizers. So each of these pieces of technology change that slope of food production on the original chart that we showed. Changes the steepness, and it could even change the shape. And over time, different technologies are going to change where that trajectory is headed. But it completely blows out of the water the initial fact that the model's like this short slope, and you're going to hit a population issue at that Malthusian catastrophe. We've moved that Malthusian catastrophe point so far up on the population curve that we haven't felt that barrier. All of a sudden now we can import food from other places. We can grow our food on the other side of the planet and ship it to where we are, regardless of the population in our current city. It's like globalization and technology either neutered the Malthusian model completely, or it has moved the ceiling at which the bust and the boom, kind of bops around. It's moved the ceiling from where it was pre-industrial revolution to this new, we maybe haven't hit the top yet ceiling. But at a certain point, we are going to run up against the finite amount of resources that we have on this planet.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's largely what the fourth turning is trying to say, is that we go through these cycles. It's kind of saying that the boom bust cycles happen. It's saying it generationally that it does take technological advances, but these things basically come no matter what. That's kind of what you're saying, right? It's going to happen. It's
both population drives more food production, and more food production drives population.
Anti-Malthusian theory says that, and I don't know why anybody would disagree with the first part of it, at least, but necessity creates innovation. So anti-Malthusian theory says that technology will always be ahead of the Malthusian catastrophe.
I love that. Here's how so far so good.
As the cliff comes ahead, we get more road. We see the cliff coming. Great. And the regime shift is what they're calling it. And sometimes I guess that's a good way to put it, because maybe that's why, relating it to the fourth turning more, it is a regime shift. It is 80 to 100 years where you're waiting for all of these old ideas to die away so that something new can take its place. And that usually causes, because at the end of the cycle, the reason things are going down is because the older people have all the control of the resources and have no incentive to change anything. So then there has to be a changing of the guard. It's dangerous. It's bad for everybody. In a way,
it's volatile.
It feels like a Malthusian catastrophe, even if it doesn't approach all the way to the level of catastrophe. You do get recessions and possibly wars, and I guess big enough, and it is a catastrophe. You could say maybe we are already in that catastrophe, but like I said, I feel like it's manufactured, and it's been manufactured since the late 70s when we've seen wages and profits, you know, do the opposite, you know, like
Right.
we've on
I've
the
got another chart if I can throw it up.
yeah, go for it.
This is what income per person looks like. When Malthus made this model, it was pre-industrial revolution, so it was following this boop, 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 up and down zigzag, you know.
Exactly.
Industrial revolution is that, I forget what it was labeled on the chart you just showed, but it's that first pivot point where the slope goes up. And
yeah.
right here, so industrial revolution is that blue dot next to Bosserup or Boserup, right above the word population.
Okay. Yeah.
Industrial revolution dodges that population curve and avoids the catastrophe point.
And the dot that says regime shift, that's the internet and computers.
That's fertilizer and tractors and whatever else, all the individual things
and that
along
next
the
dot,
way.
That's automation and AI.
That's AI. Yep. And if we do it right, this is what's exciting. If we do this right, we will completely dodge our issues because AI can scale so much faster than us and fix problems so much faster than us. Ideally, you know, like we might be okay.
However, we might be okay as long as we can make sure that those resources get to everyone and not just to the top 1%. Which
we have to coordinate and allocate better than we currently are.
Let me see if I can find this quickly. I would love to show another chart.
This is a good chart episode. I wish I had more tabs ready.
We're with the charts, man. I wish I could find it really quick. I think we've used it before in previous episodes, but it's basically the chart that shows that like somewhere in the 70s, you see corporate profits start to go up, and you see wages go down to the point that like right now we're seeing that like, you know, hand over fist profits while people, you know, can barely afford rent. The funny thing is, I guess I wanted to pull it up just to show exactly how it looks like. And yeah, this is just throughout the 80s. Yeah. So, but yeah, it's still going, but it looks exactly like the right end of the Malthusian trap. It looks like what happens after a Malthusian catastrophe, except you could exchange the population line for corporate profits and the food production line as wages. So if you put it in that sense, we've already reached the Malthusian trap. And the Malthusian trap is that while we're all, you know, struggling to pay the bills, the billionaires are literally hoarding all of the money and all of the resources. And we're already living on the other end of a Malthusian catastrophe if you're not in the top 10%. And that's actually what keeps the middle class in check, is the fear that you'll slip lower. And this is, interestingly enough, there's been a study that shows the relation between money and happiness. And that relation being that money increases your happiness only to the point that it allows you to live a sustainable and happy life. And basically you're keeping the bills at bay. After that
like
point, it's diminishing
70,000 per year. I think that was the number.
But after that, it's diminishing returns. More money won't make you more happy after a certain level. How much of social engineering is keeping most people under that $70,000 mark and keeping the rest of the people afraid of falling under that $70,000 mark? So if we were to relate that, can you throw up the Malthusian chart that you had first? The first one you were showing, because if we relate that chart basically to social measures, then we could say like the Malthusian catastrophe is when corporations became more important than people, and that population line is corporate profits, and that production of food is quality of life for people and wages. And
even product. That could be what's being produced. But the margin is increasing so fast that the profits
That's true. You could look at it just as corporate profits,
wages are flat
compared to compared to cost. That's it. Cost of production. Yeah. You're right, because humans' wages are part of cost of production. So you're
easiest
right.
one to minimize. I guess second easiest. The first easiest one to minimize is anything that you can externalize to the environment, then externalize to people.
Yep, there you go. That's true. So I started this episode very anti-Malthusian because, I felt like, because I believe it's manufactured, and I haven't changed that view. But I guess now I'm saying, wait, the model is good. I see that the model's good, and you can actually relate it to other things. And we're all living on the opposite end of a Malthusian catastrophe right now. And that Malthusian catastrophe is basically the corporatization of America and the globalization that has taken place since the 70s throughout the 90s. And basically all of this stuff, historically speaking, the internet was the next big thing. But because we've messed up our money system so bad, the internet couldn't be the next boom because there's still all this corporate greed sucking up all the money and that's why we have Web 2. That's why we have YouTube and Facebook and everybody taking 30% out of our pockets because the corporations have all the profit. And that's why we see the emergence of Bitcoin and cryptography. And this is, in my opinion, this is the next, this is the next jump,
I would agree.
This is the green line. Like we pointed out before, crypto giving individuals power back to be able to fight against these systems is what helps us get out of the Malthusian catastrophe we're in. So I've had a total switch on this where I'm like, oh, it's never coming. I'm like, whoa, wait, I'm in it. I'm the frog in the boiling water, not thinking about how hot the fucking water is.
I see what you mean, but I don't know that I 100% agree with that stance. I still think that there is some validity to this Malthus model.
Well, no,
it's just that we haven't reached that ceiling. Okay.
We have reached the ceiling. I'm saying if you get the vibe on the internet, we wouldn't have made Bitcoin if we hadn't reached the ceiling already. People had enough. Bitcoin was created around the same time as the Occupy movement. Occupy movement was came right out of that whole thing. It was all from that banking thing. And that was it. That was the ceiling. That was the Malthusian catastrophe. We just haven't admitted it on a social layer. Nobody wants to say that the United States is bankrupt. But the reality is, when we were relating it to food and food production, no, it's manufactured. It's not real. But if you want to just talk about capital, you want to talk about capital and the way capital being distributed, there is. And it's almost like the debasement of money. It makes me wonder also if the debasement of money, government's doing this thing, is to combat billionaires. It is to combat, we can't fight these people. The only way to fight these people is to hopefully rug them. If we can destroy what they're made of, but in doing so, you hurt poor people first. In order to sweep the rug out of Jeff Bezos, you've got to get everybody under him first, because everybody,
Jeff Bezos has the money he has because everybody is buying products through his website. And if everybody buying products gets culled, that's less money going to the Jeff Bezos.
That, and it's also less employees. And it's also that if you want to go after rich people, you also hurt their employees, which is why you see people getting so angry about green energy, because they work in the oil field. And even if they're only making $20 to $50 an hour doing very dangerous work, then, they're ready to defend it because it's their way of life and they don't have another choice. So I really see that, I think we are in a Malthusian catastrophe. I believe it now.
We're experiencing it, don't realize it yet. How do we get out? What is the escape? We dodged it the first time with the Industrial Revolution. We got to dodge with chemicals and tractors, and we're getting crypto and AI and automation.
It may be that crypto and AI might be part of it, because crypto for sure, because I feel like crypto is a chance for quote unquote wealth redistribution rather. Like, it is a chance for people to get it on the ground level of something new, but it's not it's not an equalizer in the sense that it's going to mess with people at the top. It just gives people at the bottom more of a fighting chance to get in there. So it doesn't solve the whole problem, but it does give people lower down the chain better technologies to fight back with. And maybe the knockoff effects of things like DeFi and Bitcoin and safe remittances between individuals takes away the power of the nation states and also takes away the power of corporations. Corporations will have more power because we depend on their services and the things they have. And that's actually a scary future, to think that corporations will become the next set of governors that we have. And that's the promise, the hope of cryptography is, no, we don't want that future, and we need to protect ourselves now in the digital world. AI is hopefully just another set of brains that can help us get to better solutions that are better for everybody, rather than, people being focused on, as we're talking about here on our Moloch show, about their own individual, like me over everybody else. How do we optimize for cooperation? And I think having a third party agent who is impartial could help.
Agreed. So I think, looking at this chart we have up here, what I'm understanding your perspective to be is we might be somewhere between the regime shift blue dot and the next blue dot. Regime shift dot might have been creation of the internet, and the next blue dot might be AI. But we are currently under the Malthusian catastrophe curve. We're slightly under this, like we've crossed the population line.
According to this chart, with food resources, yes. If we're talking about food, yes. If we're talking about capital, no.
Okay.
If we replace food with capital, I would say that we are definitely in a place where...
Would you say we're on the blue line then, in terms of capital?
Yeah, in terms of capital, yes, because we're watching the United States and China debase each other's currencies to trash, and poor people are paying the price. So, and then the other thing that, should have said this earlier, but the other thing that makes the Malthusian trap untrue, at least in its early stages, is the fact that population growth is actually declining. And
that's true. This graph assumes population only grows exponentially, unless it hits a bust, unless it hits a barrier, like we're out of nuts on the rat island. And
so that's actually a good argument to make, because, okay, so if population is declining and we're having aging populations, meaning that there's less people being born than getting old, basically. Then we could argue that the reason we're seeing that is because of improper distribution of wealth. And because there are so many trillionaires and billionaires, that there are less just people. And we're actually in a bust cycle of population. And it's not food-based. It's capital-based.
I wonder if Malthus had anticipated this model being more versatile or more applicable than to just food. I wonder if it was intended to be like, here's food as an example, but this is how systems work, versus everything revolves around food.
Well, I think that in Malthus's time, the most important, think about it like this in the arc of human evolution, for instance. All right, so when Malthus wrote this stuff in the 1800s, he died in 1834. So this dude never saw the Industrial Revolution. He had no idea what was coming. Food was the most important resource. In Maslow's hierarchy of needs, 200 years ago, we were still, it's crazy to think that was 200 years ago, right? Almost 200 years ago, 190 years ago. That's crazy. Anyway, at that point, the human race was still at the bottom rung of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We were still mostly looking for food and trying to make sustainable housing and security. That's why the creation of this country was running from the insecurity of Europe, of the United States. I mean, the United States was created running from the Malthusian trap of Europe, because we did see plagues. And that's another thing you could relate this to, is plagues and illnesses and things like that. Like,
it's another bust.
But here, if we're talking about literally population to resource growth, food made the most sense because that's where we were as a species. But
it was the most important resource.
Food is food is way down there. Everybody can get access to food. It doesn't matter.
It's money.
Food
Nobody
is
can
everywhere.
get access to money, and you
There
can't
it
get
is.
food without money. So now our chart needs to be focused on money or capital, because it's the only resource that matters.
And because we've seen this boom in industrialization and agriculture, and we see, as every human individual sees, how much food there is. So the only way to keep us in check is to make us believe that somehow it's not going to be there tomorrow. And the only way to do that is to force you into a system of exchanging your labor for dollars to eat. And the only way to make you adhere to that system is on the corporate level, to not treat your employees well. You have to make them thankful for whatever you give them by not giving them very much. You know what I mean? But we're at the point where the younger generations are over the pizza parties. They're not.
Yeah. Dude, 100%. You can't slap pizza on anything anymore. No one cares. Pizza fixes nothing.
That's hilarious. Yeah. So
That's a great example, though, the pizza party thing.
So I guess, I didn't think about this going into the episode, but that's why this is so great, this back and forth, because I went into this thinking, the Malthusian Trap's a bunch of crap. And I still see why I say that. But now I'm like, oh, it's because I'm looking at it as food, and it's not food, it's capital. And boom, if it's capital,
has changed. Then
we are in the catastrophe. And that's why we created Bitcoin.
I see it all now, too. I didn't see this going into the episode. I was stuck on resources. I was stuck on population. I'd gotten past the food thing. But I think we've nailed it here. I think we've pinned it down that the new model, it has to be capital. If the world runs on capital, capital's the resource to optimize for. Before, the world didn't run on capitalism. It was just running on food. So
it's a very new concept in the 1800s, And even then, It still just mattered more about having food on your plate. Capital didn't run the world. We didn't have stock exchanges in the same way. I mean, actually, when was the first Ponzi scheme? Have you? I'm forgetting it all right now, but
fairly recent.
No. Fairly recent. I think it was in the 1800s, though. So what I'm saying is, paper stocks weren't a thing then. So even capital still meant gold and resources. It meant something in the bank. And the bank was literally your army.
Got it. Dutch East India Company.
That's it.
Conglomerate whose operations span the 17th and 18th centuries.
Yep, that was the first Ponzi scheme. That's where it all went astray. I read that book.
The first IPO, August 1602. There it is.
Yep. Yeah, wait, 1602?
August 1602.
Okay, so it does
predate
Malthus, but I guess it still wasn't that. Now, see, this is something I have to do some research into now, because I didn't think about that. I read the book, The Madness of Crowds, and they talk about this specifically. Anyway, I will have to look at this on a timeline and see, after that happened, how long before, those types of markets really became, mainstream? How long did it take before the first Ponzi scheme and, stocks being this is perfectly legit. We all do this now. And you know what I mean? And then how did that lead into, say, fractional reserve banking and money and fiat money? And I'm just thinking now how, in a way, due to industrialization not happening yet, he was right based on the food thing. But we were already creating the capital tools, and the capital tools just didn't make sense as much in a world where you're still worried about where your food comes from. And it's more important to know where your food is coming from. And people were still largely independent, building their own houses, growing their own food, doing things for themselves, that these capital tools didn't mean anything to a farmer. They didn't mean anything to people living in the mountains or whatever. So these capital tools didn't make sense until the Industrial Revolution. And we saw this boom in food and people being able to rely on stores instead of growing their own food and all these things. So it's almost like capital was always the thing that was going to take this over as the boom came. And it might also be, taking this back, another big boom bust in that area was going from hunter-gatherer into agricultural, because
huge change.
Exactly. And
now your food production, you just make however much food you want for the population that you want.
Exactly. And then you would see another population growth as cities were born, and then city states, and then it grew into, feudalism. And so in a way, like, food has been the thing for so long because that's where we were evolutionarily. Like, we were in that level of, we still have food scarcity will always be a thing. Housing will always be a thing. Safety from other countries and other people will always be. These are like the rungs of the ladder on the pyramid. So then you get to a point where all that goes away because we've literally created everything we could possibly. We literally have created utopia over the last 100 years. We have everything any human could possibly imagine. Almost everything in Star Trek has been invented now. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
except peace.
Except peace. But so the point being, we are clearly in a boom, and yet we're constantly told that it's the ride's over. Like, and we see people in the street who the ride's already over for. Like, the people living in the street or the people living in poverty are already past the catastrophe there. And so, yeah, like, we're in the catastrophe. We just didn't realize it.
I got to show this chart now. I've got some charts queued up. All of these things point toward us being in a boom, but our experience indicates bust.
Right.
Over the last 200 years, we've seen extreme poverty plummet. We've seen democracy increase. We've seen vaccination rates increase to prevent, deaths from diseases that we know of. Literacy rates have increased. Education has increased. Child mortality rate has decreased. All of these things support a population boom, support an advancement of our civilization. But somehow we're experiencing a bust. And I don't know how to explain it.
Well, there's two ways you could look at it. I would say one is, as you move farther and farther away from being survivors and having to think on that level, more and more inconveniences feel worse. So, like, there was a time where, like, you were given birth at home with your sister or whoever happens to be around to help you out get through this thing. And so that's part of the reason, like, the rise of medicine and other types of systems, you could say these things have all, like, helped with increasing the chance of a child living. So then now, like, you don't think about, like, your great-great-great-grandmother who had to give birth at home in that situation. No meds, no accoutrement. It is what it is.
No doctor. You've, like you said, just got whoever's around helping you deliver.
So now you can sue a hospital if the AC was too cold, and it's not, you know what I mean? So, like, there's definitely as we get more wealthy as a society, there is definitely a decrease in your ability to handle hard things. And that's one of the things in the fourth turning as well, is that the reason things get bad is because the younger generations are also unprepared for hard things because they've lived in a boom cycle. They've lived through like lots of food and no war and whatever. And so, and actually that's every time I say some of these things, I'm like, man, it's such almost propaganda because we've never lived in a time of no war. Like there's been a war going on since my entire life. Like since I've been born, there's been a war. Like I'm lucky I didn't have to go. You know what I mean? Like, I like when I was getting out of high school, there was like talks of a draft, you know? And
I remember.
So we definitely get more sensitive to what would have been minor inconveniences to people generations ago. And there's actually nothing wrong with that because it means we're moving higher up Maslow's hierarchy of needs as a society. And that's actually
stuff is normal. Getting and having the what we need level of stuff is the norm.
Right. And so the thing is, this is where it's so weird is because we live in a world where some people can't even meet the bottom rung. Other people are struggling at the second rung. And then some people are so fucking comfortable at the third rung that their iPhone not arriving on time is like the end of the world. And that, you know what I mean? And these things, people seriously think that their first world problems are equal to someone dying in the streets, and that like me being inconvenienced at the Sprint store is more important than like, you know, homelessness and all these other things. Like as a society, and this is Moloch, because individually we focus on ourselves. We say, I'm doing good. I have mine. I have food on the table. And now I'm angry because I can't get concert tickets. And I'm not worried about the fact that, you know, you're dying homeless on the streets because, well, you didn't play the game right. You should have figured this out. Like, I have a job. I earn everything. I do everything for myself. I don't know why you can't figure your shit out. And we blame the individual for the failings of a society.
Society's inability to support all of its individuals.
Exactly. And as a species, not just as a nation, but as a species, we could be moving higher up that Maslow's hierarchy of needs if we would stop pretending that we are in a catastrophe, when in fact, all of the catastrophes we've been in for the last 200 years are largely manufactured.
Yeah, they're either intentional
or at least the last 100. I mean, we definitely, I haven't read the book yet, but Shelley has a book she wants me to read called Shock Doctrine. But it sounds like a lot of things I'm already very familiar with, which is basically like you use things like, you know, illness, war, whatever you can as a thing to get people to give away their rights. You know, if you can tell people, hey, we're doing this to protect you, and then you convince them enough, they take a little bit, and then, you know, what might have been in the beginning a legitimate action to protect citizens then turns into a way to control citizens. And a perfect example of this, because I could bring up the most recent one, but that's one's very fresh and people would get angry depending, you know, like, and also we might get blocked if we say anything about it. But a good one to talk about is fresh in our minds right now after recording this episode is 9/11. So we saw what happened at the Twin Towers, and we said, we never want to see that happen again. And we gave TSA the power to do whatever they want to us anytime. And then we gave, which never existed before, and then we gave the NSA.
Department of Homeland Security was created out of that.
Right. And then we gave FEMA infinite powers if they needed.
We had the Patriot Act.
And that gave the NSA the right to read all of our emails and do whatever they want. And we all of that came out of one incident, all of our rights being stripped away. And there are things that we're still dealing with today in the internet. We're still trying to get our rights back. And then, you know, fast forward, the net neutrality thing got repealed. So it's like we're still fighting to get all these rights back. And it all comes out of like manufactured events, or even if the event itself is real, but you manufacture more out of it so that you can seize more and more power over your citizens.
Oof. So there's no way to escape it. We're already in it. The new filter isn't food, it's capital. What do we take away from this? How do we, given all of these charts and numbers and observations of the past, what do we take from this as maybe advice how to avoid a Malthusian trap or escape from a trap? What can we walk away with from this? I'm stuck on this. We're just collapsing and we just have to wait it out.
Well, I mean, awareness is a super important one. And I think that, overall, going back to previous episodes, like in the end, the name of the game is to cooperate. So I think that on an individual level, if each person is playing their own game of cooperation, then it'll put us in a better place. And this might be a slight detour, but I don't think so. So a lot of the time, whenever we're talking about like governments and corporations versus individuals, a great one is with the environment and pollution. We say, why should I, on the individual level, care about recycling when I know that 70% of the pollution comes directly from corporations? And that's true. However, corporations are made up of people, individuals. And if every individual who worked for a corporation like Shell or Amazon or whoever deeply cared about the environment and deeply cared about doing the right thing, then they wouldn't allow corporate policies that do the wrong thing, even if it is to make more money. And while you can say that the CEOs and the CFOs and the owners and the founders and whoever, they have all more power, the bottom line is if individuals at the lowest level all the way up want to cooperate instead of compete, then it changes the corporate culture. And now 70% of the pollution isn't coming from a corporation because the individuals in that corporation turned it around. So I think that that's really, that's the point of this show is, to point out all these traps, but really to say, cooperate is what we're going for, right? In the end. And so every time we deflect and we say someone else is doing worse than me, it's the same. That is what keeps Moloch alive, is saying that person is more evil. If I don't
have to get it as bad as them, so I've won my individual.
If I don't do it, someone else will. These are all Moloch whispering in your ear, and it is a dangerous game because that is like with AI, for instance, that's what why some people think we're running at a cliff of being destroyed by this thing, because now we have to create the fastest AI, because if we don't, someone else will.
Somebody else will. And they might use it against us, so we have to be first. Yeah.
Right. And not even caring if the thing itself will destroy us. We just have to...
we have to be the first to get it. This is the race to nukes.
Right.
We're going to have a whole episode on that, I think.
There is a nukes episode coming up, and I'm sure we'll get... Yeah, I mean...
Juicy.
That's another one that I did talk about before we were recording with, that was another one of those situations where we needed to believe the end was nigh.
Yes, indeed.
And maybe it was, but also
it was because we were choosing it to be nigh.
Right. So that's some of my takeaways. And I mean, this was really great because I feel like we went into this episode with our own ideas about it, and we came out with very different ideas. Even if the first ideas still hold true, we've actually grown and expanded on it and added a bunch of charts.
Discussion. The charts are great. I love charts. But you're right. This discussion, we chatted a bit before going on record, before turning on the recording. But our discussions, even before the episode and during the episode, have changed, have developed, have progressed.
Right.
And that's been really fun.
Yeah.
Really do.
Yeah. And I think, as we said in the first episode, I think this is going to change and evolve the whole time. We've got a bunch of episodes where I think each trap and each idea is going to expand. And this discussion of it is going to bring new ideas that we didn't have going into this. When we thought of Moloch traps and doing this thing, we had a certain set of what we were going for. And who knows, maybe by episode 14, we will have some really great ideas about coordination.
Here's hoping, right?
Right?
Somebody's got to fix this shit. It could be cool if it's us.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, I guess that's it for my conclusions. What do you think?
I went into it with my main focus, my main view was just, our slope has changed. I thought for sure we just moved our ceiling up. Malthusian trap is fine. Model stays legit. Industrial Revolution just moves that cap. So now we're bouncing around up here. But it is so much more than that. Having this refocus away from food and resources to capital, an artificial variable that we have agreed to create and live by, capital now is the deciding factor. It's the defining, that's your slope. That's your resource that you're dealing with is the capital. That's a game changer in terms of how I'm viewing this.
Also, this might be a little too philosophical, but in this sense, capital has replaced God, because there was a time where if your farm didn't do well and you didn't have enough food to feed your family, it was because you pissed off God. It was because you messed up with the cosmos, and now you're paying for it. And
you got to sacrifice something to get back to normal.
And we've replaced God with capital. And we say, if you don't have enough money to feed your family and keep a house, well, you must have done something wrong.
Yep. It's off the capital markets.
It's an individual fault. It's not the system. It's you.
Yikes.
So, yeah, those are my big takeaways.
Whole new perspective to look at it through. That's for sure.
Cool. Well, let's do this again sometime.
Next week.
Yeah, everybody. Thanks for watching today's episode of Moloch Traps, the Malthusian Trap. We got 2 traps in this title. We hope you enjoy the series. As always, none of what we say is legal or financial advice, and we encourage listeners to do their own research in these areas before making any related decisions. If you find our content informational, educational, or entertaining and would like to support us, please collect these episodes on Lens. 18% of our proceeds go to BanklessDAO, 2% supports LensTube for hosting our videos, and the rest helps to make From A to Z Productions possible. To stay on top of our weekly series, subscribe to us on the BanklessDAO YouTube. Don't forget to like and comment while you're there. We will see you next time, friends.